The wagon wheels groaned beneath her weight as Violet Bennett climbed onto the supply wagon's bench seat, her hands trembling as she gripped the worn wood, knowing that with every mile westward she traveled further from the life that had shattered around her like broken glass. The Arizona sun blazed overhead in the June heat of 1882, turning Yuma into a furnace of dust and desperation, and she welcomed the anonymity this brutal landscape promised, a place where nobody asked questions and fewer people cared about the answers. She had paid the wagon master nearly everything she owned for passage west with the supply train. 6 wagons loaded with goods destined for the mining camps and ranches scattered across the territory, and she intended to fade into the landscape like morning mist burning away under the relentless sun. The other drivers barely glanced her way when she climbed aboard. Men out here had learned not to pry into other people's business, especially when that person looked as hollow-eyed and worn as she must have appeared after 3 weeks of travel from Missouri. Her auburn hair hung in a simple braid down her back, dusty and dull, and her calico dress had faded to nearly nothing under the constant assault of sun and grit. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, carrying secrets that weighed more than any cargo these wagons hauled. Nobody spoke to her that first day on the trail. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Patterson, had given her simple instructions about keeping her team steady and following the wagon ahead, then left her to her own devices. That suited Violet perfectly. She did not want conversation or company. She wanted to vanish into this endless expanse of sand and rock and sagebrush, to become just another anonymous soul drifting through the territories. The supply train moved slowly through the desert, following established trails that connected the scattered settlements. They traveled in the early morning and late afternoon, resting during the worst heat of midday under whatever shade they could find. Violet learned the rhythm quickly, grateful for the physical exhaustion that came with managing the team of mules, grateful for anything that kept her mind occupied and away from memories she could not bear to examine. 3 days into the journey, she noticed him. He rode a paint horse, black and white patches that stood out against the muted browns and tans of the landscape. He was not part of the wagon train, but he paralleled their route, sometimes visible on a distant ridge, other times appearing near their camp as evening fell. The other drivers seemed to know him, greeting him with casual waves and brief conversations Violet could not hear from her position at the back of the train. On the 4th evening, as she unhitched her team and led them to water at a small creek, he approached on foot, leading his horse. Violet kept her head down, focusing intently on the mules, willing him to pass by without acknowledging her presence. "You are doing good work with that team," he said, his voice carrying a warm drawl that spoke of Texas or maybe Oklahoma. "Those mules can be stubborn, but they are listening to you." Violet did not look up. "They are fine animals. Name is James Dalton," he continued, undeterred by her cool response. "I scout for supply trains sometimes, make sure the route ahead is clear. Been watching this train since you left Yuma." She said nothing, hoping silence would drive him away. Instead, she heard him move closer, his boots crunching on the sandy ground. "You got a name?" he asked, and there was something gentle in his tone that made her throat tighten. "That is not your concern," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Fair enough," James said easily. "But I reckon it will be nice to have something to call you besides the lady on Wagon 6. Despite herself, Violet glanced up. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were startlingly blue, bright against his tanned face, and they held a directness that made her uncomfortable. He looked to be in his mid-20s, lean and strong in the way of men who spent their lives working under the open sky. His clothing was practical worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat he held in his hands. "Violet," she said finally, the word escaping before she could stop it. Then, because it felt dangerous to give even that much, she turned away and busied herself with checking the mule's hooves. "Violet," he repeated as though testing the name. "That is pretty. Suits you." She did not respond, and after a moment she heard him walk away. When she finally looked up, he was leading his horse toward the main camp where the other drivers were building a fire for supper. Violet ate alone that night, as she had every night since joining the train. She made a small fire away from the main group and cooked beans and hardtack, washing it down with lukewarm water from her canteen. The desert cooled quickly once the sun set, and she wrapped herself in a blanket, sitting close to the dying embers and watching stars emerge in the vast darkness overhead. She did not want to think about James Dalton, or his kind eyes, or the way he had looked at her like she was actually visible, actually present in the world. She had worked hard to become invisible. Back in Missouri, she had been someone Violet Bennett, daughter of a respected merchant, engaged to marry the son of a local banker. That life had imploded 6 months ago when she discovered her fiancé's true nature, when she learned that the charming smile he showed the world hid something cruel and violent. When she had tried to break the engagement, her family had taken his side, insisting she was being hysterical, that all women got nervous before their wedding. When she had shown them the bruises he had left on her arms during one of their private meetings, they had blamed her for provoking him. So she had left, taken what money she had saved and fled west, lying about her circumstances to anyone who asked, making her way through a succession of towns until she reached Yuma. She had thought the desert would swallow her up, that she could finally stop running and simply cease to exist in any meaningful way. The supply wagon job had seemed perfect a way to keep moving, to remain nobody, to drift through the wilderness without attachments or expectations. But James Dalton had seen her. He had spoken to her like she mattered, like she was worth noticing. And that terrified her more than the desert heat or the dangerous trails or the possibility of Apache raids that the other drivers whispered about around their campfires. The next morning, she rose before dawn and prepared her team, determined to stay as isolated as she had been before. But as the wagons rolled out across the sandy terrain, she caught sight of James riding ahead, and something in her chest twisted painfully. She forced her attention back to the mules, to the endless horizon, to anything but the cowboy on the paint horse. They traveled for 8 days without incident. The landscape shifted gradually, the flat desert giving way to rocky hills dotted with scrub brush and twisted juniper trees. The heat remained oppressive, but occasional breezes brought relief. Patterson announced they would reach a trading post called Silver Creek in 2 more days, where they would rest and resupply before continuing north to the mining camps. Violet kept to herself, speaking only when necessary, avoiding the main camp each evening. But she could not avoid noticing James. He was always nearby, riding scout, checking the trail ahead, conferring with Patterson about conditions. And sometimes, when she looked up from her work, she found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, concern mixed with curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper she did not want to name. On the 9th evening, as she was setting up her small camp, James appeared again. This time he carried 2 tin cups and a pot of coffee. "Figured you might like something hot to drink," he said, settling himself on a rock a respectful distance from her fire. "Coffee is not great, but it is warm." Violet wanted to refuse, to send him away with cold words that would make him leave her alone. But the smell of the coffee was tempting, and something about his easy manner made it difficult to maintain her walls. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting the cup he poured for her. They sat in silence for a while, drinking the bitter coffee as the desert cooled around them. Violet waited for him to ask questions, to pry into her past, to demand explanations for why she was out here alone. But James just sat peacefully, his long legs stretched out in front of him, watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of orange and purple. Finally, unable to bear the waiting, Violet spoke. "Why do you keep approaching me?" James considered the question, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Because I see you trying real hard to disappear, and I reckon that is about the loneliest thing a person can do." His words hit her like a physical blow. She set down her coffee cup, her hands shaking. "Maybe I want to be alone." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe you have been hurt bad enough that being alone feels safer than letting anyone close." "You do not know anything about me," Violet said, her voice sharp with defensive anger. "No, I do not," James said calmly. "But I know what it looks like when someone is running from something that scared them deep down. I have seen it before. Hell, I have been that person myself." Despite her determination to remain closed off, Violet found herself curious. "What were you running from?" James took a long drink of his coffee before answering. "War, mostly. I was 16 when I joined up with the Confederate cavalry in 1877, lied about my age to get in. Thought it would be glorious, thought I would be a hero." He shook his head, his expression distant. "War is not glorious. It is just blood and dying and trying to forget what you have done. After it ended, I could not go home, could not face the person I had been before, knowing what I had become. So I drifted west, worked cattle drives, hired out as a scout, kept moving because stopping meant thinking." "What changed?" Violet asked softly. "Met an old ranch hand in New Mexico who told me I could keep running forever, but I would just be dragging my ghosts along behind me. He said I had to stop sometime and decide if I was going to let the past own me, or if I was going to build something new." James looked at her directly, his blue eyes holding hers. "Took me a while to understand what he meant, but eventually I figured out that hiding is not the same as healing." Violet felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "I am not hiding." "All right," James said, and there was no judgment in his voice, just acceptance. "But if you were, it would be okay. And if you ever decided you wanted to stop, well, I would be around." He stood then, collecting the coffee pot and his cup. "Thank you for sharing your fire," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "Sleep well, Violet." He walked away into the gathering darkness, leaving her alone with her thoughts and a confusing swirl of emotions she did not want to examine. That night, wrapped in her blanket under the stars, Violet cried for the first time since leaving Missouri. She cried for the girl she had been, for the trust that had been shattered, for the family that had failed to protect her. And she cried because a blue-eyed cowboy had seen through her carefully constructed invisibility, and instead of demanding something from her, had simply offered understanding. The next morning, she felt raw and exposed, like a wound that had been cleaned but still ached. She prepared her team mechanically, going through the familiar motions while her mind churned. As the wagons rolled out, she saw James riding ahead as usual, but he did not look her way, giving her the space she needed. They reached Silver Creek late the following afternoon. The trading post was a collection of rough wooden buildings clustered around a reliable spring that gave the place its name. There was a general store, a small stable, a building that served as both saloon and boarding house, and a handful of other structures in various states of repair. After 10 days on the trail, even this modest outpost felt like civilization. Patterson announced they would rest here for 2 days, allowing the teams to recover and giving everyone a chance to resupply. Violet used some of her dwindling funds to purchase flour, dried meat, and ammunition for the small revolver she carried hidden in her belongings. She avoided the saloon where most of the drivers gathered, instead finding a quiet spot near the spring where she could wash her clothes and bathe in privacy. She was hanging her laundry to dry on a line strung between two cottonwood trees when she heard voices raised in anger from the direction of the main buildings. Violet hesitated, then moved closer, curiosity overcoming her usual caution. A group of men had gathered near the stable. She recognized most of the wagon drivers and saw James standing at the edge of the crowd. In the center, two men faced each other aggressively. One was a driver named Carson, a heavy-set man who had largely ignored her during the journey. The other was a stranger, lean and dangerous-looking, with a gun belt slung low on his hips. "I said the horse is mine," the stranger was saying, his voice cold. "Bought it fair and square in Tucson." "That is my horse," Carson insisted, his face red. "Got stolen from me 3 weeks back." "I recognize that marking on his left flank." The stranger smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You calling me a thief?" The tension ratcheted up immediately. Violet saw several men step back, clearing space. She knew what was coming, had heard stories about how quickly disagreements turned deadly out here where law was scarce, and men settled disputes with gunfire. Before the situation could escalate further, James moved forward, placing himself between the two angry men. "Easy now," he said, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Nobody needs to die over a horse." "Stay out of this, Dalton," the stranger said. "This is not your business. Everything that happens at Silver Creek while this supply train is here is my business," James replied evenly. "I scout for Patterson, and I am not going to let a gunfight mess up this stop when there is a simple solution available." "What solution?" Carson demanded. James turned to him. "You said your horse was stolen 3 weeks ago." "Where?" "Little town called Mineral Springs, about 50 miles north of here." "And the horse had a distinctive marking." "Yes, a brand on the left flank shaped like a cross." James turned to the stranger. "Mind if we check your horse?" The man's eyes narrowed, but he was outnumbered and seemed to recognize that. "Check all you want. I told you I bought him legitimate." The group moved to the stable where the disputed horse was tied. Sure enough, the animal bore a cross-shaped brand on its left flank. But when James examined it closely, running his fingers over the mark, he straightened and shook his head. "This brand is fresh," he said. "Maybe 2 weeks old. Healed over but recent enough to see. Carson, when was your horse branded?" 5 years ago, when I bought him from a ranch in California." James looked at the stranger. "So either this is not Carson's horse but one that someone branded to look like it, or someone altered the brand after stealing it. Either way, you should be able to show proof of purchase if you bought it legitimate." The stranger's hand drifted toward his gun and Violet felt her heart hammering. But Patterson stepped forward, his own rifle held casually but ready. "I reckon you better move along," the wagon master said quietly. "And leave the horse. If you got proof of purchase, you can come back with it. Otherwise, we will assume you came by this animal dishonestly." For a long moment, the stranger stood frozen, weighing his options. Then he spat in the dust and stalked away, his hand falling from his gun. "Keep the damn horse," he muttered. "Was not worth much anyway." The tension drained from the crowd as the man mounted a different horse and rode out of Silver Creek at a gallop. Carson clapped James on the shoulder, effusive in his gratitude. Violet watched as James accepted the thanks with quiet modesty, deflecting the praise and suggesting everyone get back to their business. As the crowd dispersed, Violet found herself approaching James without consciously deciding to do so. He was checking his horse's saddle when she reached him. "That was well done," she said quietly. James looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he smiled. "Just common sense. Most men out here are not looking for trouble if they can avoid it. Just needed to give everyone a way to step back without losing face." "Still," Violet persisted, "it took courage to step between them. That man could have shot you." "Could have," James agreed, "but did not. Most situations are not as dangerous as they seem if you keep your head and look for solutions instead of fighting." He paused, studying her. "You seem steadier today. Sleep well." The observation was gentle, not prying, but it touched the raw places inside her. "I slept," she said, which was not quite an answer. "Good." James returned his attention to his saddle, giving her an easy out if she wanted to leave. But Violet found she did not want to walk away. Instead, she stood there watching him work, comfortable in the silence in a way she had not expected to be. Finally, James spoke again. "There is a decent meal to be had at the saloon tonight. Real beef stew, not trail beans. You should join us." Violet's first instinct was to refuse, to retreat to her solitary camp. But something in her was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being invisible. "Maybe I will," she heard herself say. James looked up, and the smile that crossed his face was like sunrise, bright and genuine. "Good. I will save you a seat." That evening, for the first time since joining the supply train, Violet entered the saloon and sat with the other drivers. The building was rough, just wooden planks and a dirt floor, but it was sturdy and the food was hot. James had indeed saved her a place at one of the long tables, positioning himself between her and the bulk of the other men, giving her a buffer of space that felt protective without being controlling. The stew was delicious, rich with beef and vegetables that must have cost a fortune this far from any farm. Violet ate slowly, savoring each bite while conversation flowed around her. The drivers were telling stories, exaggerating their adventures, competing to tell the tallest tale. Violet found herself relaxing slightly, even smiling at some of the more outrageous claims. James, she noticed, did not participate in the storytelling contest. He ate his meal and listened, occasionally adding a quiet comment but mostly just observing. She appreciated his lack of bombast, his calm presence in the midst of the rowdy group. When the meal ended, some of the men ordered whiskey and settled in for serious drinking. James stood and gestured to Violet. "Walk with me. Silver Creek is not much, but the stars are pretty tonight." She should have said no. She should have returned to her wagon, maintained the distance she had established. But instead, she found herself nodding and following him out into the cool night air. They walked in silence to the edge of the settlement, where the spring created a small pool surrounded by cottonwoods. The sound of water trickling over rocks was soothing, and the smell of the desert after dark sand and sage and something indefinably wild filled the air. "Can I ask you something?" James said eventually, his voice soft in the darkness. Violet tensed. "You can ask. I might not answer. Fair enough." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "When you look at me, do you see someone dangerous?" The question surprised her. "No," she said honestly. "Why would you think that?" "Because you flinch sometimes when men get too close. Because you keep yourself apart. Because you carry a gun hidden in your bag, yes. I noticed when you were buying ammunition earlier, and the way you handle it suggests you know how to use it. Something happened to you, something that made you afraid. I want you to know that I am not that. I am not whoever hurt you." Violet felt her throat close up, tears threatening again. "I know you are not," she whispered, "but knowing and feeling are different things." "They are," James agreed. "And I am not asking you to feel anything you are not ready to feel. I just wanted you to really know that I see you, Violet. I see you trying to disappear, and I understand why you might want to. But I also see the person underneath all that hurt, the strong woman who drove a supply wagon across the Arizona desert alone, who stands her ground even when she is scared. That is the person I want to know, if you will let me. His words broke something open inside her, some tightly held knot of fear and shame and loneliness. Before she could stop herself, the whole story came pouring out: her engagement, her fiancé's violence, her family's betrayal, her desperate flight west. She told him about the nights spent in rough boarding houses, the men who had propositioned her, thinking she was without protection, the constant fear that somehow she would be found and dragged back to Missouri. She told him about choosing the supply wagon specifically because it meant constant movement, no permanence, no possibility of building anything that could be destroyed. James listened without interrupting, his expression grave in the starlight. When she finally fell silent, exhausted by the confession, he was quiet for a long moment. "I am sorry," he said finally. "I am sorry that happened to you. I am sorry your family did not protect you. I am sorry you have had to carry that alone." He turned to face her fully. "But I want you to know something, Violet Bennett. You are not damaged. You are not broken. You are a survivor, and there is no shame in that. What was done to you was not your fault, and choosing to protect yourself by leaving was not weakness, it was the bravest thing you could have done." No one had said anything like that to her. Not her mother, not her friends, not the few people she had confided in during her journey west. Hearing it now from this man who barely knew her felt like absolution, like permission to stop blaming herself for what had happened. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I meant what I said earlier," James continued. "I see you and I am staying, not because I want something from you or because I think you need rescuing, but because I would like to know you better if you will let me. And I will do it at whatever pace feels right to you. No pressure, no expectations, just being present, being here." Violet looked at him, this cowboy with kind eyes and a patient heart, and felt something shift inside her. The fear did not disappear. She suspected it would be a long time before she stopped startling at sudden movements or feeling anxious around strangers. But beneath the fear, something new was growing: hope. "I would like that," she said softly. "I would like to know you better too." James smiled, and in that moment, Violet felt truly seen for the first time in months. Not judged, not pitied, not dismissed, just seen as she was, with all her scars and strength. They returned to the settlement eventually, walking slowly through the darkness. James escorted her to her wagon, bidding her good night with a tip of his hat and a promise to bring coffee in the morning. Violet climbed into her bedroll feeling lighter than she had since leaving Missouri, as though some of the weight she had been carrying had been shared and thus made easier to bear. The supply train remained at Silver Creek for the promised 2 days. During that time, Violet found herself spending more time with James, drawn to his steady presence and easy companionship. They talked about simple things: the landscape, the weather, the quirks of the various wagon drivers. But they also talked about deeper matters: their hopes for the future, their regrets about the past, their understanding of the harsh but beautiful land they traveled through. James told her about his family back in Texas, parents and siblings he had not seen in years. He talked about wanting to own land someday, to build something permanent and meaningful. He spoke of his time as a scout, the satisfaction of helping travelers navigate safely through dangerous territory. Violet found herself sharing her own dreams, things she had buried deep because they felt impossible. She talked about wanting to run a business, perhaps a boarding house or a small store in one of the growing towns. She spoke of her love for reading, her desire to be part of a community again, but on her own terms, not as someone's property or burden. "You could do that," James said seriously, when she mentioned the business idea. "You are organized and capable. I have watched you manage that supply wagon. You keep your gear maintained, your team healthy, your supplies inventoried. Those are the skills you need to run any operation." His confidence in her abilities was foreign and wonderful. "No one ever told me I could do something like that," Violet admitted. "My father always said women were suited for wives and mothers, not business." "Your father was wrong," James said bluntly. "I have known plenty of women who run successful businesses out here. The West is not like the East. People care more about whether you can do the work than what gender you are." The idea planted itself in Violet's mind, taking root and beginning to grow. Maybe she did not have to keep running forever. Maybe she could find a place to stop, to build something real. On the evening before the supply train was set to depart, James found Violet near the spring again. She had come to love this spot, the sound of water and the shelter of the cottonwoods providing a sense of peace. "I have been thinking," James said without preamble. "The supply train is heading north to the mining camps, but my scouting contract with Patterson ends here. I need to decide where to go next." Violet felt her heart sink. Of course he would not stay with the train. He had his own life, his own plans. She had no claim on him, no right to expect him to remain nearby. "Where will you go?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "That depends," James said, his blue eyes searching her face. "I have been thinking about what I said before, about building something permanent. There is a town about 60 miles northwest of here called Copper Ridge. It is growing because of the mines nearby, and last I heard, they needed people willing to work hard and invest in the community." He paused. "I was thinking of heading there, maybe finding work on one of the ranches or setting up as a guide for mining operations. But I do not want to go if it means leaving you." Violet stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You would change your plans for me." "Not change," James corrected gently. "Choose. I can scout anywhere, but I only know one woman who has captured my attention so completely that I cannot imagine riding away from her." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "These past few days getting to know you have been the best days I have had in years. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and when you smile, which you are doing more often now, it feels like watching the sun come up. I am not asking you for promises or commitments. I know you need time to heal. But I would like to court you properly, Violet Bennett, and I would like to do it in a place where we could both build new lives if things work out between us." Violet's mind raced. Copper Ridge, a growing town that needed capable people. She still had some money left, enough perhaps to secure room and board while she figured out what came next. And James would be there, not hovering, not demanding, just present and willing to take things slowly. "I am afraid," she admitted. "What if I cannot be what you want? What if I am too damaged to ever trust anyone completely again?" James reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. "Then we will figure it out together. I am not perfect either, Violet. I have my own scars, my own fears. But I think maybe we could help each other heal. And if it does not work out, if you decide you want something different, I will respect that. I just want the chance to try." Violet looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face, so open and honest in the twilight. Every instinct screamed at her to protect herself, to refuse, to keep running. But beneath the fear was that growing seed of hope, nurtured by James's patience and kindness. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let us go to Copper Ridge, together." The smile that broke across James's face was incandescent. He squeezed her hand gently, then released it, respecting her boundaries even in his joy. "We will leave in the morning if that is acceptable to you. It is about 3 days' travel, but the route is safe and well marked." That night, Violet told Patterson she would be leaving the supply train. The wagon master was sorry to lose a good driver, but understanding when she explained she had decided to settle in Copper Ridge. He paid her the wages she was owed and wished her well. The other drivers gave her a send-off the next morning, several of them expressing surprise that the quiet woman from Wagon 6 was leaving. Carson, whose horse James had helped recover, pressed a small bag of coins into her hand. "For helping keep us all safe on the trail," he said gruffly. "You were steady, never complained. That is worth something." Violet was touched by the gesture and the recognition. She had thought herself invisible, but apparently people had noticed her competence and reliability. It was a good feeling, being valued for her work rather than her appearance or connections. James had secured a gentle mare for Violet to ride, along with a pack mule to carry her belongings. As they rode away from Silver Creek, Violet looked back once at the supply wagons preparing to continue north, then turned her face toward Copper Ridge and whatever future awaited there. The journey took 4 days rather than 3 because they traveled at an easy pace, James attentive to Violet's comfort and the animal's condition. They camped under the stars each night, maintaining separate bedrolls but sitting together by the fire, talking until exhaustion claimed them. James was as good as his word, never pushing for more than Violet was ready to give. He treated her with respect and consideration, helping with camp tasks without making her feel incapable, sharing his knowledge of the land without being condescending. Violet found herself relaxing in his presence, the constant vigilance she had maintained for months beginning to ease. On the 3rd evening, as they sat watching the fire burn down to embers, James told her about the first time he had killed a man. It had been during a cattle drive, a dispute with rustlers that had turned violent. His voice was heavy with old pain as he described the moment, the weight of taking a life even in self-defense. "I tell you this," he said quietly, "because I want you to know I am not untouched by violence either. I have done things that haunt me, but I choose every day not to let those things define me. I choose to be better than my worst moments." Violet understood what he was offering, a glimpse of his own vulnerabilities, a demonstration that strength and gentleness could coexist, that being a man did not require violence or domination. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "It helps, knowing you understand complicated things." They reached Copper Ridge on a bright afternoon when the sun turned the copper-rich hills surrounding the town into living flame. The settlement was larger than Silver Creek, with a proper main street lined with businesses. A general store, a hotel, a bank, a restaurant, a dress shop, a barber, and several saloons. Beyond the main street, houses spread out in rough rows, some newly built and others clearly established for years. In the distance, mine works scarred the hillsides, and Violet could see the tiny figures of men working the claims. James led them to the hotel, a 2-story structure with a covered porch and glass windows, luxuries after weeks in the desert. The proprietor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Henshaw, had rooms available and was happy to rent one to Violet on a weekly basis. "You planning to stay in Copper Ridge, dear?" Mrs. Henshaw asked as she showed Violet to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "I am considering it," Violet said carefully. "I am looking for opportunities to start a business." Mrs. Henshaw's eyes lit up. "Well, you have come to the right place. This town is growing faster than anything I have ever seen. Just last month we got a church and a school. Families are moving in, not just minors anymore. What kind of business were you thinking? Perhaps a boarding house or a restaurant, Violet said, the ideas forming even as she spoke. Something that serves the community. Smart thinking, Mrs. Henshaw approved. We can always use more places for people to stay and eat. Tell you what, there is a property 2 streets over that just became available. The previous owner died last month, natural causes. Just old age, and his son back east is looking to sell. Building is solid, could be converted to almost anything. I can introduce you to the banker who is handling the estate if you are interested. Violet felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. This was moving fast, but maybe that was good. Maybe overthinking would just give her fear time to resurface. Yes, I would like that very much. Over the following days, Violet explored Copper Ridge with growing interest. The town had an energy to it, a sense of possibility that matched her own tentative hopes. She met with the banker, Mr. Preston, who showed her the property Mrs. Henshaw had mentioned. It was a large building, previously used as a boarding house, with 8 rooms upstairs and a spacious common area and kitchen downstairs. The structure was sound, and the price, while substantial, was not impossible. I would need to see the exact figures, Violet told Mr. Preston, but I am very interested. James, meanwhile, had found work with a rancher named Thompson who owned land outside town and needed someone to help manage his expanding cattle operation. The pay was good, and Thompson offered a small cabin on the property where James could live. But James spent his evenings in town, often joining Violet for dinner at the restaurant and walking with her as she explored her potential new home. One evening, as they sat on the hotel porch watching the sunset, Violet turned to James with sudden determination. "I am going to buy the property," she announced. "I have enough saved for a down payment, and Mr. Preston says the bank will extend credit for the rest based on my business plan. It is frightening and probably foolish, but I want to do it." James grinned, his pride evident. "I think it is the smartest thing you could do. You will make a success of it, Violet. I know you will." "I was thinking," Violet continued, her heart racing, "that I could call it the Bennett House. Establish it under my own name, make it mine completely." "I love it," James said warmly. "The Bennett House has a good ring to it." Over the next weeks, Violet threw herself into transforming the property. She cleaned and repaired, purchased furniture and supplies, hired a cook and a housekeeper. James helped whenever he could, spending his days off working on repairs and improvements. His presence was comforting but never overwhelming. He understood when she needed space to work alone, and he never assumed a position of authority over her business decisions. As summer deepened into fall, the Bennett house opened its doors. Violet's combination of fair prices, comfortable accommodations, and excellent meals, her cook, a widow named Mrs. Garcia, was a genius in the kitchen, quickly established the boarding house as a favorite in Copper Ridge. She housed miners and their families, traveling merchants and workers from the surrounding ranches. The business thrived, and Violet found herself respected in the community as a capable businesswoman. Her relationship with James deepened as well, though at a pace that felt safe. They shared meals together several times a week. He took her riding on the weekends, showing her the beautiful country surrounding Copper Ridge. They attended church together, and when a dance was held to celebrate the town's 3rd anniversary, James asked permission to be her escort. The dance was held in the largest saloon, the furniture pushed aside to create space for dancing. Violet wore a new dress she had purchased from the dress shop, a lovely blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. When James arrived to collect her, the look on his face made her blush. "You are beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The evening was magical. Violet had not danced in over a year, not since before everything had fallen apart in Missouri. At first, she was nervous about being held, even in the formal embrace of a dance. But James was patient, his hold gentle and respectful, and gradually she relaxed into the movement and the music. "You are a good dancer," she told him as they swept across the floor. "I am adequate," James replied with a self-deprecating smile. "You are the one with natural grace. I am just trying not to step on your feet." As the evening progressed and the dances grew livelier, Violet found herself laughing freely, something she had not done in so long. Watching James attempt a complicated reel and end up nearly tangled with two other couples was hilarious. And when he bowed dramatically to apologize to his dancing partners, she could not contain her mirth. Later, as things wound down and couples drifted outside to enjoy the cool night air, James and Violet found themselves alone on the edge of the gathering. The music was softer now, slower, and James held out his hand. "One more dance?" he asked. Violet stepped into his arms and they moved together under the stars. The music was distant, but they did not need it. They swayed gently, caught in their own world, and Violet realized she felt safe, truly, deeply safe for the first time in over a year. "I am falling in love with you," James said quietly, his breath warm against her hair. "I have been falling since the first moment I saw you on that supply wagon, looking like you were carrying the weight of the world. I know it might be too soon to say, and I am not asking for anything in return. I just wanted you to know." Violet pulled back slightly to look up at him. His blue eyes were serious, vulnerable in a way that made her heart ache. She thought about how patient he had been, how he had proven over and over that his words matched his actions, that he was exactly who he claimed to be. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "It terrifies me, but it is true." James cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "May I kiss you?" she nodded, and when his lips met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Violet felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief and joy, and the overwhelming realization that she had found something precious. A man who saw her strength, respected her independence, and loved her not despite her scars but including them, as part of the whole person she was. When they finally parted, James wiped her tears away gently. "I am staying," he said, echoing words he had spoken months ago. "For as long as you will have me, I am staying." "Good," Violet replied, her voice steady and sure, "because I am done disappearing." The months that followed were the happiest of Violet's life. Her relationship with James continued to deepen, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. He proposed to her one evening in November as they walked along the creek that ran through Copper Ridge, going down on one knee in the dried grass and offering her a simple gold band. "I know we have not known each other long by some standards," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "But I know my heart, Violet. I know I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see your face. I want to support your dreams and have you support mine. I want to be your partner in all things. Will you marry me?" Violet looked at this man who had waited so patiently, who had proven his trustworthiness time and again, who had never tried to control or diminish her. "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, I will marry you, James Dalton." They were married in December in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Henshaw cried through the entire ceremony. Mrs. Garcia prepared a feast for the reception that was talked about for weeks afterward. Violet wore a dress of ivory silk, simple but elegant, and James wore his best suit, his dark hair freshly cut, and his blue eyes shining with happiness. As they stood before the minister exchanging vows, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left Missouri broken and afraid, determined to disappear into the vast western landscape. But she had found instead a place to belong, work that fulfilled her, and a man who loved her completely. The wedding night was gentle and unhurried. James was patient with Violet's remaining fears, taking time to reassure her with touch and words until she felt comfortable and safe. When they finally came together, it was an act of love and trust that left them both shaken and amazed. "I love you," James murmured against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "And I love you," Violet replied, her heart full to bursting. "Thank you for seeing me when I wanted to disappear. Thank you for staying." They settled into married life with surprising ease. Violet continued to run the Bennett house, her reputation as a capable businesswoman growing throughout the territory. James managed Thompson's ranch with skill, eventually becoming a partner in the operation as the business expanded. They purchased a small house on the edge of Copper Ridge, halfway between town and the ranch, a comfortable home they filled with love and laughter. In the spring of 1883, Violet discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy tinged with apprehension, but James's excitement was so genuine that her fears gradually subsided. He was attentive throughout her pregnancy, helping with the boarding house when she grew too tired, rubbing her aching feet in the evenings, reading aloud to her from the newspapers and books that arrived regularly from San Francisco. Their son was born in November, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's determination. They named him William, and he became the center of their world. Violet hired additional help at the Bennett house so she could spend more time with William in his early months, and James adjusted his work schedule to be home every evening. Watching James with their son filled Violet with an emotion she could barely name. He was so gentle, so patient, rocking William for hours when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing off key lullabies that made Violet laugh. This was the kind of father she had always hoped her children would have present, engaged, loving. As William grew from infant to toddler, their lives took on a comfortable rhythm. The Bennett house continued to prosper. Copper Ridge grew larger, becoming a proper town with paved streets and gas lamps and regular stage-coach service. James and Thompson expanded their cattle operation, becoming one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Violet joined the town council, advocating for better schools and support for families. She and James became pillars of the community, respected and loved. In 1885, their daughter Emma was born, a tiny thing with auburn hair and blue eyes who had her father wrapped around her finger from the first moment. William, now 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, constantly wanting to help care for her. Watching her children play together, Violet sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life, so different from the nightmare she had fled. One evening in late 1886, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset while the children played in the yard, Violet turned to James with tears in her eyes. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, concerned. "Nothing is wrong," Violet assured him, taking his hand. "I was just thinking about how different everything could have been. If I had not taken that job with the supply wagon, if you had not been scouting that train, if you had not seen me trying to disappear and decided to stay anyway." James squeezed her hand gently. "But all those things did happen. You were brave enough to save yourself, and I was fortunate enough to find you. That is what matters." "I know," Violet said, wiping her eyes. "I just never imagined I could be this happy. After everything that happened, I thought I would spend my life alone, afraid, but you changed that. You showed me I could trust again, love again, build something real and lasting." "We changed it together," James corrected. You did the hardest part, Violet. You chose to stop running to take a chance on building a new life. I just got to be part of that journey." They sat in companionable silence, watching William chase Emma around the yard, her delighted shrieks filling the air. The Arizona sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge in the vast darkness. "You ever regret it?" Violet asked suddenly. "Giving up the wandering life to settle here?" James looked at her as though she had said something absurd. "Never. Not for a single second. This life with you and our children is more than I ever dreamed of having. I was lost before I met you, Violet. You gave me purpose, direction, a reason to become the best version of myself." Violet leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," James replied. "Always have, always will." The years continued to pass in a blur of happiness and growth. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Emma was wild and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief that reminded Violet of herself before the world had taught her to be cautious. In 1888, they welcomed another son, Thomas, who seemed to combine the best traits of both his siblings. The Bennett house expanded, with Violet purchasing adjacent properties and creating a proper hotel complex that became famous throughout the territory for its comfort and hospitality. James and Thompson's ranch became one of the largest in Arizona, supplying beef to towns and mining camps across the region. They prospered, but more importantly, they remained devoted to each other and to the community they had helped build. Violet sometimes received letters from Missouri, her mother writing occasionally, tentative attempts to rebuild a relationship that had been shattered. Violet responded politely, but distantly. She had forgiven her family for failing to protect her, but she had no desire to return to that world. Her life was in Copper Ridge now, with James and their children and the community they loved. One day in 1890, a stranger arrived at the Bennett house seeking accommodation. Violet was working at the front desk when he walked in, and something about him made her pause. He was well-dressed, his manner polished, and when he gave his name, she felt a shock run through her. "Robert Merrick," he said, offering his hand. "I am looking for a room for several days while I conduct business in Copper Ridge." Violet's mind raced. Merrick had been her fiancé's surname. But this man looked nothing like Daniel Merrick. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with gray streaking his dark hair. "Are you from Missouri?" she asked carefully. The man looked surprised. "Why, yes, I am. Kansas City specifically. Have you been there?" "I am from Missouri originally," Violet said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I knew a Daniel Merrick once." "Any relation?" Robert Merrick's expression darkened. "He was my nephew. I say was because he died 3 years ago, got himself shot in a card game dispute. No great loss to the family, I am sorry to say. Daniel was always a violent, troubled young man. My brother indulged him terribly." Violet felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Daniel was dead. He could never find her, never hurt her, never threaten the life she had built. She had not realized until that moment that some small part of her had been waiting all these years, afraid that somehow her past would reach out and destroy her future. "I am sorry for your loss," she said automatically. "Do not be," Robert said bluntly. "Like I said, he was not a good man, but tell me, how did you know him?" Violet considered her answer carefully. "I was briefly engaged to him many years ago. I broke it off and came west." Understanding flickered in Robert's eyes. "Smart woman. Daniel had a temper and a cruel streak. You were well rid of him." He paused. "I hope you found something better out here." "I did," Violet said, thinking of James and their children, of the life they had built together. "I found everything I needed." Robert Merrick stayed at the Bennett house for a week, and before he left, he sought Violet out. "I want you to know," he said, "that if Daniel ever hurt you or made you feel you had to flee your home, I am sorry. My family failed to address his behavior properly. You deserved better." "Thank you," Violet said, touched by the apology, "but I have no regrets. Coming west was the best decision I ever made." That night she told James about the encounter. He held her close, understanding without words how important this closure was. "It is truly over now," Violet said, her voice wondering. "The past cannot touch me anymore." "It never could," James said firmly. "You left it behind the day you climbed onto that supply wagon, but I am glad you have confirmation that it is gone." As their 10th wedding anniversary approached in December of 1893, James planned a surprise for Violet. He worked with Mrs. Garcia and Mrs. Henshaw to arrange a celebration at the Bennett house, inviting everyone they knew in Copper Ridge and the surrounding area. On the evening of the party, Violet walked into the hotel's main dining room to find it transformed. Candles glowed on every surface, and the room was packed with friends and neighbors, all there to celebrate the couple who had become so beloved in the community. "Happy anniversary," James said, appearing at her side and offering his arm. 10 years of being the luckiest man in Arizona." Violet felt tears of joy prick her eyes. Looking around the room at the faces of people she cared about, at her 3 beautiful children playing with their friends, at the man who had seen her when she wanted to disappear and had chosen to stay, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. The party was wonderful food, music, dancing, and heartfelt toasts to the couple. People shared stories about James and Violet, about how they had helped various members of the community, about the difference the Bennett house and the ranch had made to Copper Ridge's prosperity. When it came time for James to speak, he stood and pulled Violet up with him. "10 years ago," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "I met a woman on a supply wagon who was trying to disappear. She had been hurt badly, and she thought the only way to stay safe was to become invisible. But I looked at her and saw someone extraordinary, brave and strong and beautiful in every way that mattered. I told her I saw her and I was staying. And she gave me the greatest gift of my life. She let me stay. She trusted me with her heart, even though she had every reason never to trust anyone again. These 10 years with Violet have been the happiest of my life. She is my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, and the love of my life. I cannot imagine any future that does not include her." There was not a dry eye in the room as James finished speaking. Violet stood on her toes to kiss him, not caring that everyone was watching, wanting him to know how much she loved him, how grateful she was for the life they had built together. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually people began to drift home. James and Violet stood on the porch of the Bennett house, watching the last guests depart, their children asleep upstairs in rooms at the hotel. "Thank you for tonight," Violet said softly. "It was perfect." "You are perfect," James replied, pulling her close. "And I meant every word I said. You are everything to me, Violet." "And you are everything to me," she replied. "You saved me, James. You saw me when I needed to be seen, and you stayed when I needed someone to stay. You showed me that love does not have to hurt, that partnership means supporting each other, that trust can be rebuilt. I would not be who I am without you." They stood together in the cool December night, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the town they had helped build and the life they had created. Violet thought back to that desperate woman on the supply wagon, trying so hard to disappear, to become nothing, to escape the pain of her past. That woman had been so afraid, so broken. But she had also been strong enough to keep moving, to take a chance when a blue-eyed cowboy offered friendship and patience and eventually love. The years continued to flow, bringing changes and challenges but also joy and growth. William attended university in San Francisco, studying law and eventually returning to Copper Ridge to open a practice. Emma married a rancher and settled on land adjacent to James and Thompson's spread, continuing the family's legacy. Thomas followed his father into the cattle business, his natural affinity for animals and the land making him an excellent rancher. James and Violet grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents, delighting in the arrival of William's twins, Emma's 4 children, and Thomas's son. The Bennett house remained a fixture in Copper Ridge, now run by a manager but still owned by Violet, who spent her days involved in community work and enjoying her family. In the spring of 1910, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained for nearly 30 years, Violet took James's hand. "I have been thinking," she said, "about that day you first spoke to me at the supply wagon. You said I was doing good work with the team, and I was so determined not to acknowledge you, not to let anyone see me." "I remember," James said, smiling. "You were prickly as a cactus, but I saw past that to the person underneath." "I am so glad you did," Violet said. "I am so glad you did not give up on me, even when I tried to push you away. You changed my life, James. You gave me back hope when I thought it was gone forever. You showed me that I could be strong and still accept help, that I could be loved without losing myself. Every good thing in my life came from the day you said I see you, and I am staying." James lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "And every good thing in my life came from you choosing to stop running and take a chance on us. We built something beautiful together, Violet. A family, a community, a life filled with love. That is more than most people ever get." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The scent of sage drifted on the air, mixed with the smell of cooking from the house where Emma was preparing dinner for the family gathering they held every Sunday. Violet leaned her head on James's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, unchanged despite the years that had silvered his hair and lined his face. He was still the man who had seen her when she needed to be seen, who had stayed when she needed someone to stay, who had loved her patiently and completely until she could love him back with equal devotion. "I love you," she said simply, words that had been spoken thousands of times over the years but never lost their meaning. "And I love you," James replied, words as true as the desert sky overhead, as enduring as the mountains surrounding their home. "Always have, always will." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the life they had built. Violet was no longer the broken woman trying to disappear into the wilderness. She was Violet Dalton, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and pillar of the Copper Ridge community. She had found her place in the world, not by hiding but by allowing herself to be seen, to be known, to be loved. And it had all begun with a cowboy who looked at her and said, "I see you, and I am staying." That promise had held true for 30 years and would hold true for all the years to come, binding them together through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge, youth and age. Their love was as vast as the Arizona sky, as enduring as the land itself, a testament to the healing power of patience, trust, and unwavering devotion. In the end, Violet had not disappeared into the Wild West. She had found herself there, discovered strength she had not known she possessed, built a life beyond her wildest dreams. And she had done it alongside a man who had seen her true self from the very beginning and had loved what he saw. As the evening deepened into night and they finally rose to join their family for dinner, Violet took one last look at the land that had become her home. The desert that had once seemed like a place to hide had instead become the foundation for everything good in her life. She had come west broken and afraid, seeking only to survive. But she had found so much more love, purpose, family, community, and most importantly, herself. The Bennett house stood strong in the heart of Copper Ridge, a symbol of what could be built from courage and determination. The ranch sprawled across the landscape, thriving under the management of James and Thompson, and now their children. Their home sheltered multiple generations, filled with laughter and love. And through it all, James and Violet remained at the center, their bond unbreakable, their love the cornerstone upon which everything else was built. Violet Bennett had climbed onto a supply wagon hoping to disappear, but a cowboy named James Dalton had seen her and stayed. And in that seeing, in that staying, they had built a life more beautiful than either could have imagined, a testament to the transformative power of love that sees truly, waits patiently, and commits completely. Their story became part of Copper Ridge's history, told and retold through the generations. Young couples looked to James and Violet as examples of what love could be. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the values they had embodied: kindness, patience, respect, and unwavering commitment. The Bennett house remained open for over 50 years, providing comfort and hospitality to thousands of travelers. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful operations in Arizona. But more than any material success, James and Violet's true legacy was the love they had built and maintained, the example they had set, and the family they had raised. They proved that the past did not have to define the future, that wounds could heal with time and patience, that trust could be rebuilt, and that love, real, deep, abiding love, could overcome even the deepest scars. As they entered their later years, slowing down but never losing their devotion to each other and their community, James and Violet remained inseparable. They were fixtures at church services, at town celebrations, at family gatherings. Everyone knew their story, or some version of it, and everyone was inspired by the obvious love that still radiated between them after more than 4 decades of marriage. In 1923, as they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, James stood to give another toast. His hair was white now, his movements slower, but his blue eyes still sparkled when he looked at his wife. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I made Violet a promise. I told her I saw her and I was staying. That was the easiest promise I ever made, because from the moment I met her, I knew she was extraordinary. These 40 years have only confirmed what I knew then. She is the strongest, bravest, most loving person I have ever known, and I am grateful for every single day I have gotten to spend as her husband. Violet stood beside him, tears streaming down her face, and added her own words. James Dalton saved my life in every way that matters. He saw me when I was trying to be invisible. He loved me when I thought I was unlovable. He waited patiently while I learned to trust again. He built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams. I was lost when we met, and he helped me find myself. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Their family erupted in applause and cheers, the celebration continuing long into the night. But eventually, as always, James and Violet found themselves alone on their porch, watching the stars, holding hands, exactly as they had done for 4 decades. You remember that first night at Silver Creek? Violet asked softly. When you brought me coffee and we talked by my fire. I remember everything about you, James replied. Every moment, every conversation, every smile. My life began the day I met you, Violet. And mine began the day I let you in, she said. The day I stopped trying to disappear and started trying to live. You made that possible. We made it possible together, James corrected gently. You had the courage to take the chance. I just got to benefit from that courage. They sat in peaceful silence, comfortable in each other's presence as they had been for so many years. The desert night surrounded them, vast and beautiful, the same landscape that had witnessed their first meeting, their courtship, their wedding, the building of their life together. Violet thought about the frightened woman she had been, fleeing a broken engagement and a family that had failed her, seeking only to vanish into the wilderness. She thought about James, young and wandering, searching for purpose and meaning in the aftermath of war and displacement. Two lost souls who had found each other in the most unlikely place, at the most unlikely time, and had built something extraordinary. Their love had not been effortless, healing never was. There had been difficult moments, times when Violet's old fears resurfaced, nights when James's own demons caught up with him. But they had faced everything together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating together through the good. That was what real love looked like. Not perfect, but persistent. Not without struggle, but never giving up. As the years continued to pass, James and Violet remained devoted to each other until the very end. James passed away peacefully in 1925 at the age of 70, surrounded by his family with Violet holding his hand. His last words were for her, "I see you and I love you, forever." Violet grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had built, in the memories of 43 years of marriage. She lived another 5 years, active and engaged despite her sorrow, finally passing away in 1930 at the age of 70. They were buried side by side in the Copper Ridge Cemetery under a headstone that read simply, James and Violet Dalton. He saw her. He stayed. They built a life of love. Their story became legend in Copper Ridge and beyond, a testament to the power of seeing people truly, of staying through difficulty, of building love on foundations of trust and respect. The Bennett house operated for many more decades, run by their descendants, always maintaining the standards of hospitality and kindness that Violet had established. The ranch remained in the family, prospering through multiple generations. But more than any physical legacy, James and Violet left behind a model of what love could be: patient, kind, respectful, and enduring. They proved that broken hearts could heal, that trust could be rebuilt, that people could overcome their pasts and build beautiful futures. They showed that seeing someone truly and choosing to stay even when things were difficult was one of the greatest gifts one person could give another. In the wild west of Arizona Territory in 1882, a woman climbed onto a supply wagon hoping to disappear. A cowboy saw her and decided to stay. And from that simple beginning, they built a love story that would inspire generations. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is allow ourselves to be seen, to be known, to be loved, and that the truest love is the kind that sees us completely and stays anyway.